Hello everybody and welcome back to Wando Tales. In today's episode we're going over all of the details that you need to know for solar and how to get electricity to your van. So we're going to go over 4 things in this video. The first thing is going to be an electrical tour. We'll show you all the different loads that we have in our van and we'll help you calculate your load usage. Then the second thing is going over the different components that you need to have electricity in your van. Then we'll go over wiring, like sizes, the different connections that you need, and any tips that we may have. And lastly, we're going to go over what we have and share our diagram at the end. And just a disclaimer, neither of us are electricians. I had about 2 weeks to figure out solar before I had to go back to school. So it was basically just a lot of asking questions online, watching videos, emailing companies, and trying to put all the pieces together to figure this out. And it's been working. So let's get started. Okay, so let's start with the basics. You have your key formula, which is watts equals amps times voltage. In our examples today, we're always going to use 12 or 120 as our voltage. 12 volts is your DC energy, or direct current. This is energy that comes directly from your solar panel. So think your USB outlets or your cigarette lighters. Those are 12 volt. Next, we have 120 volts, which is going to represent the AC side, or alternating current. In most US households, AC current ranges from 110 to 125 volts, with the average being 120. So we're going to use 120 volts to kind of encompass everything. For our AC energy, think 3-prong plugs or anything that you have on most of your household goods in the US. So now that we have that covered, we can go ahead and talk about what we have in our van. When you're calculating your usage, it's important to calculate your watts as well as your amps, because your watts is what your solar panel is going to be sold as, and your batteries are going to be sold with amps. So you want to know what both of those are so you can buy both pieces accordingly. Depending on the information that the power consumption of your object gives you, you can modify the formula to determine what you need to find out. It's basic math. So first we have our lights. Our lights are 3 watts each. We have 5 5,000 kW and 3 2,700 kW. And that's just going over the brightness. So the 5,000 are bright white and the 2,700 are more of a yellow, so perfect for evening. We have 3 different switches to turn on our lights. One switch turns on just a single light. Another switch turns on 4 lights, and the third switch turns on the 3 lights. So we have a bunch of different combinations of lights that we can do. We can do 1, 3, 4, 5, 7, and 8, but most of the time we just do 3, which is the 2,700 Ks. So to calculate that, you do 3 watts per 3 lights equals 9 watts. So now that you know the watt usage of your lights, you're going to do 9 watts divided by 12 volts, which is our DC side, and that's going to give you your amps. So this determines how many amps you use when you have 3 lights on every hour, which comes out to 0.75 amps in our case. We use these lights for about 4 hours a day. So you're going to do 9 watts times 4 hours a day equals 36 watts per day. And you're going to do the same thing for amps. So 0.75 amps times 4 hours equals 3 amps per day. Does this make sense? I hope it does. And if it doesn't, leave it in the comments below and I'll help you out. Next, we have our fridge. Our fridge is a DC fridge. I would highly recommend getting a DC fridge unless you're going to get a lot of solar energy, maybe if you live in Arizona or California and you're kind of stationary. For us, we have found that it's pretty hard if you're traveling all the time to get a lot of solar energy. So for us, it was very important to get a DC fridge. The fridge is one of the only items in your van that's going to stay on for a majority of the day. Our fridge stays on for about 10.5 hours maximum, so it turns itself off and on to conserve energy, totaling 378 watts per day, which equals 31.5 amps. Next, we have 2 water pumps, one for our shower and one for our sink. Since we rarely use our shower one, I'm not going to include that in our daily calculation. Instead, I'm just going to include the sink. The sink water pump we use for about an hour a day, between washing dishes, filling up our water bottles, filling up Sebastian's dog bowl, and cleaning up. So we're going to calculate that as 1 hour per day. Our water pump uses 96 watts or 8 amps per hour. So we're going to calculate that as 96 or 8. Next, we have a USB outlet. This is a very important topic because a lot of people tend to get the USB outlet with the 3-prong and the USB attached. And this is totally fine in a normal traditional household. However, using solar energy, that means that you're converting this outlet into AC energy just to convert it back to DC. Because as you remember, USB outlets use DC energy. Converting your energy back and forth between DC, AC, and back to DC, you end up losing a lot of that energy. So in order to eliminate that problem, get a USB outlet that is specific to 12 volt energy. If you go on Amazon and you type in 12 volt USB outlet, you end up getting a lot of those marine looking outlets, which I didn't really want for our van because I wanted that sleek 120 volt look. So I finally found this one and it's absolutely perfect. It's 12 volt, it runs directly on our DC side, and I'll link it down below for you guys. Each of the USB outlets uses 24 watts or 2 amps of energy per hour. We use about 2 per day for about 2 hours with charging our cell phones or charging the GoPro. So for us, we're adding that in as 48 watts or 4 amps of energy. Next, we have our Max Air Fan. The Max Air Fan has 10 different levels, which means it's going to range from 1.2 to 33.6 watts per hour, or 0.1 to 2.8 amps per hour. There's a chart online that tells you what each level uses. We try to keep our fan between levels 5 and 7 because that gives us the best total usage after about 8 hours of sleep. Next, we have the Sirocco fan, and this one blows directly on our face all night long. This one has 3 different levels ranging from 1.68 to 3.72 watts, and we always keep it on 3.72, or 0.14 to 0.31 amps. We always keep it on the maximum, and we always leave that on for about 8 hours as well. So that's going to come out to 29.76 watts, or 2.48 amps. We wired our Sirocco fan to a cigarette lighter, that way we can continuously plug it in and out, and it's not hardwired into the van. This way we can use that USB outlet for the winter time with an electric blanket instead. Lastly, we have our TV, which is a DC TV. Highly recommend because, like I mentioned, it's just so much more efficient to have DC energy in your van. So our DC TV uses 48 watts or 4 amps per hour. And since we usually watch movies on it, that gives us 2 hours of use per day. Next, let's talk about our AC side. We have 2 outlets in our van, one in the front and one in the back. The one in the front is what we usually use while cooking or blending, and the one in the back gives us access from the back door, so we can cook on our back step or if we're charging our laptop while we're sitting outside. Our main AC culprits are our induction cooktop and our NutriBullet. Now, an induction cooktop is actually really nice because if you get a 2-burner, the maximum that it could use is 1800 watts, so it'll even out the energy between the two. So if it has 10 levels, you can only use a combination of 3 and 7 or 5 and 5 until you get to 1800 watts. So that's nice. Also, if you're just using one burner, you can decide between levels 1 to 10, and rarely ever will you use a level 10 unless you're trying to boil water really quickly. So Henry and I actually tested this out to see if using a level 3 versus a level 5 is actually beneficial for you. And this is what we found out. We gotta make sure everybody stays consistent. We're on level 3 this time. Stopwatch. Ready? Start. Let me know when you're officially picking it up for the last time.
Oh. No, catastrophe. That is it.
Ready?
Go.
I guess you gotta turn it off and just let it sit in the heat or something.
You want me to?
Maybe. Okay, so let's turn it off. So 129. What is this?
3.
Okay, taste it. Okay, compare it to number 5. What's the verdict?
Number 5 is better.
Whoa, really? Why?
It's like more crispy.
Ooh, okay.
And the cheese actually melted.
So depending on the level that you put your cooktop to, whether from level 1 to 10, this can range from 100 watts to 1800 watts of energy per hour. We try to cook our meals between levels 3 and 5, which ranges from 500 to 900 watts. So we're going to average that out at 700 watts for our calculation. And we use that for about 45 minutes a night to make a meal and call it a wrap. Now this is where it could get a little bit confusing because remember we talked about watts divided by voltage equals your amps. Well, if you do our cooktop at 700 watts divided by 120 volts, you're going to come out with a really small number. You're going to come out with 5.83 amps, which is very low compared to everything else on our list. And that doesn't make any sense at all. So the reason for this is your battery is 12 volts, so you need to add that into your calculation. Since 120 volts is 10 times greater than 12 volts, you're going to take that 5.83 amps and multiply it by 10. And that's going to give you 58.3 amps. That's a lot of energy. You can also simplify this formula. Don't you love math? And instead of dividing by 120, just divide by 12. And that way, 12 times 1 is still the same. So for your AC side, do watts divided by 12 volts, not because it's 12 volts, but because of simplification. So that is our completed load calculation, and hopefully that helped you guys out calculating your load. So for us, if we use everything exactly as we said we would use 1,422 watts of energy per day. Now, we have been going over potentially getting rid of the induction cooktop for our daily use and going more towards a fire type cooking situation. And so for that, then we would drop to 897 watts. And we'll go over why this is all important in just a second. Okay, so next let's go over the different components for your van. In order to have electricity, we're going to start with our solar panel. So for the solar panels, there are two main differences between that. You can get a monocrystalline solar panel or a polycrystalline solar panel. Monocrystalline are more expensive, but more efficient, and they're usually black in color versus blue like the polycrystalline solar panels, which is purely just an aesthetic thing. So if you have the funds, definitely choose the more efficient option, as anything you can do to make your solar energy more efficient is the way to go. Next, you need a charge controller to connect your solar panel to your battery. So for the charge controller, you have to decide between MPPT, or maximum power point tracking, or PWM, pulse width modulation. So again, the main differences are going to be price and efficiency. PWM is less expensive, but it's also less efficient. With PWM, you're going to have a 50% loss with your electricity versus 33% loss with your MPPT. So more expensive, more efficient, but again, anything to make your electricity more efficient is definitely the way to go. Another thing with PWM is because it's more simple, your solar panel and your battery have to have the same voltage, whereas with MPPT, they can be different and it will accommodate for that. With PWM as well, you can have different size solar panels connected together. Of course, this reduces the efficiency and greater loss, but with MPPT, if you have two different size solar panels, so for example, 100 watts and a 200 watt solar panel, you need two different MPPTs for those. So now that you have chosen your charge controller, you can also calculate your watt hours. So you're going to take the watts of your solar panel times the sun hours, and this ranges depending on your location. You can look online to find out what your area offers in the winter versus the summer. For us, that's 3 for the winter and about 5.5 for the summer. And then if you go with PWM, you're going to multiply that with 0.5, and with MPPT, you'll multiply by 0.66. That's going to accommodate for that energy loss in your system. Next, we have the battery, where all this energy is going to go ahead and get stored. You have lead batteries, which includes flood, gel, or AGM, and then you have lithium-ion batteries. Again, cost and efficiency are key. So with lead batteries, they're going to be less expensive, but at the same time, you have to consider that with lead batteries, you can only discharge them to 50%, which means if you have 200 amp hours of battery, in reality, you only have 100 because you can't go less than 50% or you can damage the health of your battery. Considering that, you also have less cycles. So from 100 to 50%, 100 to 50% is less with lead batteries. With lithium, they're going to be more expensive, but they're also lighter in weight. They're going to have more cycles, and you can discharge them to 20%. So you can go from 100 to 20, 100 to 20, and that increases the cycles of your battery, especially if you're taking care of them. So again, you have to include all of this in your calculation, because now if you have a 200 amp hour battery, in reality you only have 160 amps if it's lithium, or 100 amps if it's lead. So keep that in mind when you do your calculations as well. And the last step to the puzzle, if you want to convert this energy from DC to AC so that you could use your laptop, your cooktop, your NutriBullet, or anything like that, you're going to need an inverter. When you choose your inverter, you're going to choose between pure sine wave or modified sine waves. Modified is going to be cheaper and they're less efficient because it can't be used with all of your electrical items. And if you do, it usually runs hotter, which means it will become less efficient. And pure sine wave is best for items with motors, like some laptops, your NutriBullet, or power tools. So anything, if you just don't want to think about it, it's better to go with pure sine. Of course, it's going to be more expensive, but it's more efficient and it's just less to think about in the long run. And lastly, with your inverter, you have to determine how many watts you want your inverter to have, as well as the surge rating. So that really depends what you're using your inverter for. So for us, because we have a cooktop that uses 1800 watts, we needed an inverter with at least 2000 watts. In addition, it has a surge of 4000 watts, which is usually what gets something powered up. So like your blow dryer and all of those things will have this surge of energy at first, and then it'll even out to what it's supposed to be. And so that accounts for that. Another thing to consider when you're choosing your inverter is the charge capability for your battery. You use your inverter for shore power, so connecting to an electrical outlet at your friend's house or at a campsite to charge your battery because you didn't get enough solar energy. So if you have an inverter with a smaller charging capability, it's going to take longer to charge that battery. Ours is... Okay, so now we're going to talk about wiring. For most of the things in your van, you're probably going to wire between 10 AWG and 22 AWG. This is the sizing of your wire. The higher the number, the smaller the wire. So for your LED lights, for example, you're probably going to have smaller wires, whereas for other items in your van, such as your water pump or your fridge, you may have a larger size wire, which has a smaller number. It's very confusing. There's a great app called the Blue Sea Circuit Wizard. Use that app. It's super helpful to help you determine what size wire you need for your item, because it helps you determine how long that wire is going to be, which includes the positive and the negative run, as well as the fuse for that object and the temperature, and it just really helps calculate all of it together, and it tells you what size wire you need for that item in your van. So use that app. So some things about wires that we would recommend. So for our DC side, we used marine grade insulated stranded wire, and stranded wire is just going to be more flexible than solid wire. And the reason for this is because, like our good friend George from Humble Road likes to say, every time you start driving, it's like an earthquake is happening in the back of your van, and so you don't want anything wiggling out of place. That being said, one of our biggest tips is if you do an especially crazy drive, just tighten all of your bolts and screws and make sure that everything is still good to go, so that reduces any energy loss that may have happened from the movement. And we usually like to check that every month anyways, because just you never know. So for your DC side, you're going to use 2 wires for everything, a positive and a negative, whereas for your AC side, you need 3 wires, a live, a neutral, and a ground, which basically means a positive, a negative, and like a safety. Don't kill me, that's just how I'm remembering it. The most common way to wire your DC side is with connectors. So you can get a pack of different connectors. For us, what we mainly use were ring terminals, which is what we used for our fuse boxes, as well as male and female disconnects for our plugs, for our like on and off switches. Another thing you may use a lot of are butt connectors, and that just connects one wire to another wire to make it longer, and that's basically what we did when we connected all of our lights together, or for example with our Sirocco fan when we connected the cigarette lighter to the wiring that already came with the fan. And the way you do that is you snip away a little bit of that insulation to reveal the stranded wire, and you twist it into the connector. You crimp it, so you're going to need a crimper tool. I would recommend getting connectors that are heat shrink. That just means you put a little bit of fire on it or a blow dryer, and the tubing will actually shrink to your wiring, and that just helps prevent it from getting wet or shaking off really easily. So definitely get heat shrink connectors. So for our AC side, we use double insulated wires, and that means that your 3 main wires are insulated, but on top of that there's another layer of insulation, and that just helps to protect everything from nicking or anything like that as well. Anything you can do to make your system more efficient and safer, definitely do that. Here are some of our other tips for your electrical system. We have 2 fuse boxes, one on the left side and one on the right side of the van, and that just means that everything that's on the left side is wired to one location and everything that's on the right side is wired to a different location. That helps with the runs of your negative and positive wiring, so that way it shortens it, which in turn makes it more efficient. We also did that because if we ever want to add something to either side of the van, it's just easier to connect to that one location versus trying to run everything back to the battery compartment or running everything to one central fuse box. Another thing we wish is we would have given ourselves better access to our wires, just in case you need to change wires that are already in place to something else to make them more efficient or to change out the system or whatever it may be. Because right now, if we were to do that, you'd have to kind of remove some ceiling panels, and that wouldn't be the easiest thing. So that's definitely something to consider when you're building your van. It's how can you make it more accessible for wires that are already in place. Another thing that we learned is troubleshooting. All of the companies will ask for the serial numbers of your components, and we didn't realize till after the fact that all of these serial numbers happen to be on the backs of things, which means we had to take things off, disconnect things just to get the serial numbers. So before you put anything into place, take pictures of everything, all the serial numbers, that way you have them in case you need to troubleshoot. And lastly, if you didn't know, all of your wires are going to go to this fuse box, which has a fuse according to the amps for that item. Fuse will actually have a wire to connect to current, and if it blows, that will literally pop, and that's how you know that you have a popped fuse and it's not a wire issue. This happened to us before, and I'm so happy we didn't change all the wires and we ended up looking at our fuse. So, alright, now let's go ahead and get into the part that you're probably all here for. Let's talk about our components, what we chose, and how everything is wired together with our diagram. Alrighty, and now for the last step. We're sitting down here because this is our electrical cabinet where we keep all of the main components, and so let's go over that one more time. We have solar on the roof, 330 watts. It's a monocrystalline solar panel, which just means it's more efficient, more expensive, and aesthetically it's all black, and so that may be more pleasing to you. I think that mainly applies to the roof of houses because people care about how their whole house looks, but for a van, I don't think it matters if it's blue or black. Next, we have our charge controller, and we went with an MPPT because, again, it's more efficient. So we went with a Victron 130. We chose 2 lithium-ion batteries. They're each 150 amp hours, which totals 300 amp hours. Last, we have the inverter, which is a 2,000 watt inverter with a 4,000 watt surge and 55 amp charger. Another major tip is to use Sprinter Source. It's a forum for sprinters, but I'm sure you could get on there and just look at all the wonderful resources that people have. I put my questions on there. Everybody wrote back, helped me fix my diagram, helped answer all of my questions, and they were just really helpful. They're truly the best people on the internet. They will help you with literally anything. They know so much. So I ended up making a diagram, and then someone helped with this diagram. So this is the new diagram. So let's go over how all of this is wired together. Starting with our solar panel, you're going to get solar wires, and I guess they're just better for like waterproofing and all of that. It also has specific ends that connects to your solar panel. So you're going to connect all of that together and then bring it down here to your MPPT. The negative wire from your solar panel goes into your MPPT, but the positive is going to go into a circuit. That's going to go into a 15 amp circuit breaker. Next, it goes into the MPPT, and the MPPT will have a positive and a negative for your PV, which is your solar panel, and a positive and negative for your battery. Next, the positive wire is going to leave your MPPT and go into your next circuit breaker. I have a 40 amp circuit breaker there, and this is just to protect the rest of the loads, making sure that nothing from the MPPT is going to be higher than that. The negative side of that MPPT is going to go to your shunt. Your shunt is basically where all of your negatives are going to meet. That way they all have a central location. It's like a negative bus bar, for example. So the shunt is a 500 amp shunt, and that's just going to protect everything because of the inverter being so powerful, and the battery, this is just a great place for it to meet. From the shunt, your negative wires go to your fuse boxes, and so from there we have the 2 fuse boxes, so one negative wire going to the left side and one going to the right side, as well as a negative going to your batteries. Depending on how you're going to connect your batteries, you could connect them in parallel or in series. If you connect your batteries in parallel, that means your negatives are going to connect to each other and your positives are going to connect to each other, which is going to keep the voltage the same but increase the amps. So for example, our batteries are 12 volt, 150 amps each. So connecting them in parallel keeps the 12 volts but increases them to 300 amp hours. Versus if you connect in series, which is negative to positive and positive to negative, what you're going to do is increase the voltage, but your amp hours are going to remain the same. So you're going to have 24 volts, but 150 amp hours. From that negative shunt, you're going to go to your battery and connect both negative terminals together. Also, between the battery's negative wire and the 500 amp negative shunt, we have a switch, and this is just in case you need to do a full power off of all the battery and all the whole system together. There is a way to turn the batteries off, so to say. So our positive has a 250 amp circuit, and this circuit, when it's opened, will open up the circuit to go to the inverter side. So on the top of our circuit is our inverter, and on the bottom is going to be all of our positives from the DC side. So from that 40 amp circuit breaker, we're going to the bottom of that bus bar, we're connecting that circuit breaker there and connecting the batteries to that, connecting both positives and then connecting them back to that location, as well as the positives for each fuse box, which each has a 30 amp circuit breaker. So the left side will have a 30 and the right side will also have its own 30, and that just allows you to turn off each side individually. So now all of those positives are meeting at the bottom of this 250 amp circuit breaker, and on the top you'll put the wire for your inverter. Another thing you want to keep in mind is you want to, in a sense, create a positive and a negative battery. So when you're connecting them positive to positive and negative to negative, you don't want to send the same terminals from the same battery back to your positive and negative bus bar. So on one of the batteries, you're going to have the positive terminal going to the positive shunt, and then on the other battery, you'll have the negative terminal go to the negative shunt. Because if you put both of those terminals going to the shunt from one battery, then you're going to drain one battery unequally than the other. And lastly, let's talk a little bit about wiring for your inverter, because it's really simple. So you're going to use double insulated extension cords. So you're going to need one to make your shore power. What you're going to do is cut off the female side, and you're going to open up those 3 wires on the inside, and you're going to put that on the AC in side of your inverter. So basically open up the strands and stick them right into that compartment. So the male side of your extension cord is still available, and that's what you're going to use to plug into the homes or the camping grounds that you're going to. Next, to wire your 120 volt outlets in your van, you can use the outlet that is already on the inverter and just plug in the male side into that part and then cut off the female side again and wire that to your outlets. Or you can use the AC out outlet on your inverter and use that as well. So what you would do is cut off both male and female ends and plug in the 3 wires into the AC out and the 3 wires into your AC outlet. And that's how you do it.
So thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next episode of Wando Tales.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
I feel like the coffee has gotten me jittery, babe. For our AC side, we used... Why is this dog barking? Is that my dog? Oh god, we didn't even go over that. To make it more efficient, less efficient. Why would you want to do that? For cooking or using an MPPT or maximum power... Ugh.